All right, we can start now if you want.
Great.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the newest episode of our UC3B. I am joined by Joe4Chicago, a mayoral candidate. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Ben, for having me. My name is Joe Holberg, and I'm the first declared candidate for mayor in Chicago. And I'll leave it at that for now.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with us here at this University of Chicago. I'd like to start off with a few questions, if you wouldn't mind. First off, as someone who's lived here for quite a while, how would you say things have changed from when you first moved here to how you feel things are now? Like, what's changed for the worse? What's changed for the better?
Yeah, certainly happy to answer that. And I've got a little bit of a cold, so I'll apologize for any of the
You know,
snuffles, but
no
hopefully
worries.
it'll be minor. Um, I grew up in rural Michigan, um, and I was a first generation college student at the University of Michigan and Pell Grant recipient, et cetera. And I struggled with basic things like paying for tuition, and we'll talk more about that background in a little bit. But just to set some context, I graduated during the Great Recession
Mm.
in 2010, and Michigan jobs and opportunities had really dried up. So I made my way to Chicago, and when I got here, I was a teacher on the West Side, and Chicago's always been an exceptional place to live and to work and to grow, but it's always been a place with its challenges. And so, when I got here, the Chicago Blackhawks were doing exceedingly well,
Right.
right? People are excited about that. A lot of energy, getting around the city like then and now using CTA. I've been riding buses and trains the whole time. Um, and I think that's one of the market differences that I would maybe bring up initially. When I got here, you sort of like hopped on a bus or hopped on a train. You went to where you went,
Right.
right? And it was pretty uneventful by design, right? Public transit is just supposed to get you from point A to point B in a relatively quick um, and innocuous way, hopefully affordable. One of the things that I see today that I think is a massive issue that's not getting the attention it deserves, even though there's sort of this public outcry for attention and support, is CTA is not safe,
Mm.
it's not clean, and it really struggles to be on time. And that's one of the major differences. The other major difference that I would say that exists comparing, my early experience to now is the affordability issue. When I moved to Chicago, my rent was $625 a month. And for that same style place, you'd probably be facing 14, 15, maybe even $1,700. And that's in the span maybe about a 10 to 15-year period, which is a pretty insane difference from an affordability perspective. And so not only is it more expensive on the rent side, but it's getting increasingly expensive to move from renting to owning either a condo, single family home, or multi-unit property. You're finding that the affordability is slipping out of reach for millions of people across the city. So those are a couple of big, sort of comparative then and now issues.
Right. And then segueing from that, relating back to the topics of CTA. So as you know, most recently, the city's been sort of grappling with its debt, and one of the proposed solutions that was in major talks was severe cuts to CTA's like operations in regards to having only the red and blue line operate,
Mhm.
and I guess discontinuation of several of the the bus routes that run.
Mhm.
From your perspective as a resident, do you feel that that should have even considered an option?
I think it's, I the couple of things to sort of unpack there. It's a good question and definitely a worthwhile topic of conversation. You know, Number one, reduction in service is something that's going to immediately impact people who rely on and use CTA the most. And so, when things like that are discussed, we have to take it exceedingly seriously because we're going to be impacting all types of people and professions and people from all over the city. The types of people that need the CTA the most are going to be the people that are using it at the very beginning of the morning, right? To get to early shifts at either in healthcare, in food services, in other industries. And then on the flip side, the people are using it at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. These are people that are shutting down the restaurants, the kitchens, wait
Right.
staff, etc. And so when you're talking about reductions in service, I think a lot of the tail end, um, early morning and late night, those are some easy targets because they have lower ridership
Mm,
overall compared to the main workday. But at the same time, those are the groups of individuals that might rely on it more so. That being said, when you think about what other cities like Philadelphia did with, pretty drastic reduction in service, like that really hampered the city's ability to sort of function. And I think they've been trying to figure out a way out of that. Now, the positive side of this is as CTA is sort of being not consolidated, but sort of like merged with the larger regional transit body, which had happened in this last legislative session. Now you have that restructuring coupled with over $1 billion in funding, which is being deemed once in a generation or sort of historic levels of funding. And I think there's one, it's a really great thing that's happening because you're going to be able to create more fiscal stability within the transit system. You're going to be able to make modernization investments. You're going to be able to keep service levels up. But the impetus from the public dimension, or at least the government dimension, is we really need to make sure that we're designing the system to maximize the amount of ridership, and we got to get back to maybe not even if it's like pre-COVID levels.
mm,
You look at ridership in Chicago, and it hasn't rebounded even as close to other systems like New York. We have to get that ridership up in order for the revenue to be generated to make the system financially sustainable in the long run, or we're going to continue to be in these sort of like deficit spending areas where we're going to continue to come back to these ideas of sort of like service shutdowns or service limitations, which are not previously discussed ideal.
mm,
So I'm excited about the direction that we're taking. Those types of efforts, while they may be longer term investments, they do not alleviate us from some of the core issues that are driving ridership down, which is the lack of safety and the lack of cleanliness. And you're hearing people, tens of thousands of people, they're posting on Instagram, they're posting on Twitter, etc. And you're seeing all kinds of unacceptable behavior, jumping the turnstiles, not paying your fare. Excuse me, I'm sorry. You see people using CTA as a bathroom, a trash can, all types of, excuse me, all types of issues. And I just saw ABC7 just noted that violence on CTA has increased about 4.5%, which is clearly unacceptable. So we have a long way to go.
right.
Excuse me.
So yeah, no worries. So I guess as sort of a piggybacking off of that, I would say that speaking from someone who came here from Atlanta,
Hmm.
I would say that there are definitely, like, needless to say, there are obvious differences between the two cities, Atlanta and Chicago. But I will say that in terms of accessibility, I've seen like a lot more leaps and bounds being made in regards to Chicago in terms of catering to some the people or the demographics who might not have like ready access to a car, as opposed to Atlanta, where you pretty much need a car if you want to get anywhere in the city. And I guess what I will say though is being based off of that, there's a lot of sort of undeserved flack that the city of Chicago is getting in regards to not specifically just the situation happening with CTA, but the general like perspective of the city as a whole from outside of Chicago. Um, so as someone who's like figuring like reps Chicago, as I would hope you were as
Oh yeah,
a future mayoral
yeah, yeah.
candidate, um, I would I do want to ask, like, how often do you find yourself doing damage control for the city whenever you talk to someone who's like interested in your campaign, but not as like a resident of Chicago, but as someone who just happens to be interested?
Yeah. I think Chicago people who have experienced Chicago, and there's nuance here, right? Because not every Chicagoan's lived reality is that where if they're traveling outside the city, they actually want to defend Chicago because some people's lived reality is, filled with violence, filled with lack of jobs and opportunities. And so, there is an awareness and a sensitivity that some people might not feel like Chicago is the best city for them and for their families. Now, writ large, while that may be true for some people in a valid position for some to take, what I would say is for people that do love Chicago, and that's most people, right?
Right.
Imperfect as we may be, we go out and we rep Chicago hard when we're not in Chicago. Even if you're in Chicago and somebody is like visiting, you're gonna find people all over the city that are just like trying to talk to tourists or that are visitors and hype up the city. Oh, you should go here. You should check this out. Maybe slide them one of the secret places, but not too many because you don't want them to get bombarded by tourists and all that stuff. But when you are out, and I've traveled a fair amount, as a small business owner, as somebody who has worked in a number of fields, I've been all over the country. And when you tell people that you're from Chicago and they say, "Oh, is it safe or is it okay?" or you get this sort of like immediate reaction, and that's in the boardroom all the way down to like taking a taxi or an Uber. People are like, "Oh, Chicago," and the realization there is the perception of Chicago from the outside. We need to do some serious work to improve our story, our branding, and ultimately the marketing of the city. And that's one of the beautiful things that I'm really excited about in being the next mayor is the mayor really needs to be the chief salesperson of the city. I mean, like, you got to be like the Chicago hype man or hype woman. You got to get out there and really tell the story of Chicago.
Mhm.
And we haven't had that in a while. And I think our image and the perception of Chicago has been dominated by negative news headlines. And so Chicago's in a very reactive stance to our own image, both nationally and internationally. Whereas we need to take control of that narrative. And you see a lot of great efforts underway. You see a lot of positive momentum from things like P33 that's talking up, the technology scene and sector. JB's done a good job promoting quantum and the facility down on the South Shore. You've got examples of more institutionalized things like World Business Chicago that are trying to lay out a case for Chicago's future. I think there's some opportunities there to enhance that from the mayor's position. And then lastly, you see sort of like marketing efforts around attracting visitors and more of the convention scene with Choose Chicago. These are all positive efforts, but at the same time, we really do need a mayor that is highlighting the best of Chicago. And I think that's clearly absent in the current administration. He's more in the sort of like divide and conquer, splitting people into groups, and making people like sort of fight amongst each other. It's
Right.
not really a unification strategy, and it's not a positive message about Chicago. Still in that very defensive, reactive state, and so I think there's an opportunity to increase the perception of our city.
So it's funny you mentioned, I guess, one of the methods of, I guess, damage control being that sometimes Uber or slash Lyft drivers will, you know, talk up the city to people who were visiting from out of state, out of the city. Because that's exactly what happened to me. As soon as I mentioned I was from Atlanta, what had happened was he mentioned all like the statistics. He's saying, like, technically Atlanta has more homicides per capita than the city, and I wasn't in a defensive stance, mind you. In fact, I was in my head. I was like, "Oh, he's kind of right, actually." So, like, in a way, like my first introduction to the city was a sort of like, I guess, me deviating from the narrative that Chicago was a bad city.
Mm-hmm.
It was more so like I'm exploring not just a new environment, but like it's like a new way of living. Because now, like, instead of me having to drive, you know, 45, having to drive in 10 miles from south end to north end of Atlanta, I can do the same thing, but do the CTA.
Mhm.
And like you mentioned before, with as many issues as there are with CTA, I think the fact that there is an infrastructure for that sort of thing compared to not just Atlanta, but other like southern cities who are just vehemently against the idea of public transit, I think it's been such a wake up call for me. And I
Yeah.
guess that's why we both agree, like we love this
Yeah.
city. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, and to be clear, like the issues that CTA have are accentuated by the fact that the infrastructure is so amazing, right? People know how valuable public transit is and how large of an asset that is to our city. And so it has a double poignancy when it's not working as well as people either have experienced in the past, um, or expect it to be. Like you think about Chicago's infrastructure as it relates to public transit, and you've got Washington D.C., you've got New York City, and you've got Chicago as sort of like the top three public transit infrastructure systems in the entire country. Closely followed, but I think you could say, San Francisco. But then you look at all the other major cities are good. Miami, Atlanta, as you said.
Right.
You look at even something like Richmond, Virginia, or even Boston is really difficult to navigate. And then LA is just like completely impractical. They have like buses, but like that's it. And
Yeah.
it takes like 90 minutes to go like 4 miles. Um, and so you're looking at it and you're like, this is such an amazing resource, and we need to make sure that it continues to be one of the crown jewels in the city's architecture. And right now, I think that's where a lot of that frustration is. That 1 million people use CTA every single day, which is an incredible fraction of people, given the fact that we have about 2.7 million people. So you're looking at ridership levels writ large across the city that are nearing 40%, right? That's an incredible fact and one that we should be super proud of. And we should also be sort of like aggressively protective of what it means to have a city that 40% of people get to use CTA on every single day.
All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I guess now I'm kind of wanting to draw things back regarding, I guess, your upbringing in rural Michigan and the current state of, I guess, a large portion of Chicago residents. So, as someone who was initially like raised in a low income family facing food shortages or just, general socioeconomic insecurity,
Hmm.
um, let's see. I guess from your experience working as like a business owner and I guess living in the city of Chicago, like what have you seen in terms of changes towards like addressing, food insecurity, financial insecurity, that sort of manner in regards to the city? Like, have you seen things, I guess, get better, so to speak?
Well, I think the short answer to the end of that question is no.
Right.
It's actually getting less affordable to live in Chicago. We're in a moment where there are several factors that are contributing to uh, really difficult hardship for millions of hardworking individuals and families across the city. Um, and just to sort of tie that to some of the layout of the question as it relates to my background, I grew up in a house where food on the table wasn't guaranteed. And my parents worked hard, and but we had there were me and two brothers, so there were three of us, and we were hungry and we ate all the time, right? So we were
Right.
eating our parents out of house and home. Um, and it's like they faced tough choices, right? It was, do we pay for uh, school programs or sports, or do we put food on the table? Longer term projects, we had a hole in our roof for a long time, and water
Mhm.
would come in and there'd be like puddles of water in the basement, and we had like mold and all that stuff. And like, don't get me wrong, it was a great childhood, and all that stuff, but by the time I went to college, I actually had to borrow $40 from a neighbor for the application fee itself.
Uh,
And, fortunately, a neighbor was like, yeah, I want to help you out, much as my parents may have wanted to. And I got into school, ran out of money by the time I got to my senior year. and I was forced to pay for tuition or housing. And I decided to pay for tuition so I could stay in school and graduate, but I was homeless and I slept in my car. I was on food stamps. The meal plans never went far enough into the week. You sort of ran out by Thursday or Friday and sort of had to scrounge things together on Saturday to make it to Sunday when, the card would reload or whatnot. And that is to say, people all across the city, individuals and families, are feeling that type of economic stress.
Right.
And the business that I started, it was a financial education and literacy platform to help people understand how to build a budget, pay off student loans and credit card debt, save for their kids' college, save for retirement, work towards buying a home, etc. And over the course of almost a decade, we worked with over 25,000 people across Chicago and the United States. And some of these themes started to really emerge where we were seeing people get further and further behind from reaching their sort of progress and their goals. And in Chicago, we're in this moment where affordability is a key um, focus area,
Mm.
and it's a key stressor for individuals where their income and their wages, they might be flat, they might be going up a little bit, but it's getting dominated by the cost of living increase. And people are getting hit hard on all fronts from the expense perspective. Vehicles cost more to buy and to own. Um, Gas prices have gone up in the last decade, as we know, if you're driving. Um, One of the main drivers of lack of affordability is housing. Uh, and housing hits you if you're a renter
Mm.
or an owner, right? If you are trying to go from renting to owning and your rent keeps going up, it gets harder and harder to move into home ownership. And then even once you do own a home, condo or otherwise, a lot of times your needs change as your family sort of grows. And so what used to be a relatively affordable, we'll call it like a median condo in Chicago, might have been like 200 to $250,000, right? We're talking something maybe in Humboldt Park or Logan Square, Bronzeville. There was relatively affordable housing stock. And then COVID happened and everything went haywire and it hasn't really um, gone down at all. And so now you see families who start in a condo that might want to move to a larger condo or maybe buy a two flat or move into a single family home. And because the cost of moving homes has increased so dramatically, a lot of people are stuck. And when people are stuck, they don't move, which then has cascading effects because their home is now not for sale as well. And you end up having less houses on the market, which tightens the supply of housing, even if the demand is continued to be stable or increasing. And I got an economics degree, so if that went in a little bit into supply and demand, I
Right, right.
apologize for getting a little technical. But
No,
the
we love that.
general,
We love that.
yeah, the general theme here is, we have some housing pressure that needs some serious alleviation.
Mm.
And my proposed solution is pretty radical and different compared to, what is being discussed in policy circles. I haven't actually heard anyone say something remotely similar, but like we need a massive amount of new houses. We need about 100,000 new houses to sort of depressurize and potentially start to lower the cost, again, for renters and owners. Um, and I look at it over a 4-year administration. So when I become mayor, we're looking at 100,000 units over 4 years, right? 25,000 units per year. It's about 500 units per ward if you break it down to a ward level. And unfortunately, if we really want to get granular, there's only about 4 or 5 wards in the entire city that dominate most of the new housing growth. And this isn't just new houses for the sake of new houses on like, demolishing a building or using vacant land. We're also talking about sort of like an all of the above approach to building new housing. And so, we have a lot of housing stock that could be redeveloped or renovated. And I think there's some significant opportunities to bring some housing stock online for the south and the west side, which is an area that one is has a lot of potential because of the unfortunate disinvestment. But if we can get some housing stock in the south and the west side, then we can move historically marginalized communities, black and brown communities. We can create stronger pathways to home ownership, where now they're building equity instead of being in a perpetual rent trap, right?
Yeah. Again, thank you again for that seamless transition, Joe.
Yeah.
Next question I have, funny enough, is I guess as again, as a Chicago resident, I'm sure you've seen, you know, a very undeniable socioeconomic divide between the north and the south side. Ever since I guess you first moved in, and historically, of course. Um, do you feel that the gap could be closed within your lifetime? And if so, like, I guess you did briefly like describe the scale of action you were to take were you to be mayor. But I guess what I'm wondering is, do you feel like there can be more that can be done in regards to an individual scale or like a government scale?
Yeah, within my lifetime, like, I'm 38. Let's
Right,
assume I live to 100, call that a good life, right?
right,
We got 60 years, right? You can do a lot of stuff in 60 years. I mean, you go back 60 years from now, and I mean, you're back into the 60s, right?
right.
And it's like that feels like a completely different era or world. And you think about what's happened since the 60s to the present. I mean, we have mass appliance adoption. We went from black and white TV to color TV. We have satellites. We have people have set foot on the moon. We have the internet. We have supercomputers in the form of cell phones in our pockets. Like a lot can happen in 60 years. And so from that perspective, I think there's a lot to be excited about and hopeful and optimistic for. Um, but at the same time, we have to understand we're going to have to be working to overcome some of the largest inequities in our society, and in particular in Chicago, as many people will know, this city redlined South and West Side neighborhoods and essentially excluded minority populations from the single greatest asset building class in all of American history, which is home ownership. I mean, that's sort of the backbone of wealth creation for at a household level in the United States. And so we're dealing with a legacy of excluding black and brown people from the means by which wealth is built. And so this is why I think building housing is so critical,
Mhm.
both to all Chicagoans in reducing the cost of living as well as increasing affordability, but two, working towards rectifying some of those historical disinvestments or disenfranchisement mentalities that are born out of things like racism and other prejudices.
Right.
And so um, the idea here is you can't just build housing and then tell everyone, white, black, brown, purple, or otherwise, you can't just build housing and say, hey, everyone, we have brand new housing. Everyone should rent, right? It's part of the equation, but we have to be really intentional about how these programs and how people access down payment capital, how people access um, loans and financing that are not subject to sort of historical um, prejudices, right? I mean, you look at all the stats in the real estate space, it's like you can have a married black couple and a married white couple, and the married white couple, even if they make a lower income and have a lower credit score, they'll get a lower interest rate on average compared to a higher earning, higher credit score black couple. And those are things you can independently research and verify, and they've been true not only in Chicago but nationally. And so when you sit there and you're like, we have to come at this from a very intentional perspective of thinking, how do we build really vibrant, strong economic engines in communities themselves rather than relying on what I think a lot of the political class says is when the loop makes money, we need to tax them and shift it out into other areas in the city. That is one idea. The other idea is why don't we work on getting high quality jobs and employment opportunities into all the neighborhoods in the city so that those communities themselves have an economic engine, right? And when we think about the jobs of the future, we're talking about um, all types of interesting things. You've got um, battery technologies, battery manufacturing. You've got autonomous vehicles on the horizon. You've got electronics. You've got data centers. You've got the quantum facility. You have more regular things like maybe solar panel production. All of these types of jobs and opportunities that are come with strong wages, uh, decent career paths. We need to focus as a city growing, and we can grow both our population, but we also have to have a more growth oriented mindset towards business so that we're attracting businesses to Chicago to set up shop, whether it's services, technology, manufacturing, logistics, whatever the industry is. We need more jobs and more opportunities, and we need them to be more dispersed throughout the city so they're not concentrated just in the loop or other areas. And when you have those opportunities, now you have people that are walking to their job or maybe taking a bus half a mile or a mile to the job rather than coming downtown as a sole economic engine. So the way that I think about economic development is more like a neighborhood up style where we're trying to solve that by creating jobs and opportunities in neighborhoods rather than sort of relying on the centrality or the historical center of just the loop. Now, that doesn't mean we're not paying attention to or furthering the growth of the loop, but we can't look at it as sort of like the seesaw where, you know, downtown is this economic engine and then the people live everywhere else.
Mm,
That's not traditionally how Chicago was built, right? I mean, you had really vibrant manufacturing all over the city, south and west sides. You got the, um, the slaughter farms in the 1800s down on the south side, the
mm,
stockyards, et cetera. And not that we're going to bring back like pig slaughtering facilities or anything like that, but
right.
yeah, there used to be a much wider dispersal of jobs and opportunities across the city and across time.
Mm. All right. Yeah. So I guess relating back to your time as a business owner, um, so I guess to give preface to our audience, you ran a business meant to help increase financial literacy among both the city's most financially stressed or otherwise people who are, I guess, grappling with fiscal responsibility for
Mhm.
the first time in their lives. So based on that, do you feel that in order to address, I guess, the inequity in regards of like access to financial opportunities and as well as access to knowledge of how to better like manage finances, do you feel that the initiative you took, do you feel that that should be replicated, or do you think there should be a mix of both individual businesses and actions taken on the government level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that answer is all of the above,
Right.
right? Um, the business that I started, it was called Spring, and the idea was really born out of the fact that an ideal solution to financial education and financial literacy would occur at the K-12 level and the collegiate level, right? Not everyone goes to college, so but we still want people to be able to understand how to open a checking account, build a budget, save for retirement, etc. And so while we could teach personal finances in college, we know that's not a sufficient solution because not everyone goes to college. Now, if we rewind it and we look at the K-12 space, uh, very few states across the country offer anything meaningful or substantial as it relates to financial literacy and personal finances. And we don't have time to go into sort of the historical reasons why I believe through my study and my research why that is. The practical reality of today's environment is it should be taught in the K-12 space, but it is not.
Mm,
And so, if I could wave a magic wand and go to the Illinois State Board of Education, for example, or put a bug in the ear of, um, you know, the governor or something like that, I would say like, hey, we should teach people chemistry and we should teach people um, math and science and arts. We should do that. I'm not saying don't do that, but why are we not teaching students a fundamental skill and knowledge set that they will need literally every single day of their life beginning in adulthood. I mean, you turn 18 and you could sign up for like 14 credit cards that day.
Yeah.
And yet, most people don't understand the nature of credit cards or the cost of interest or how to appropriately use them to manage your credit score, et cetera. And so we just have a huge deficit as it relates to curriculum. And as a former math teacher myself, I taught at the West Side in Humboldt Park. I was in a fortunate position teaching math where I could weave in personal finances into the day's lessons and tie those back to state and national standards that I was required to teach towards. But not every teacher is going to want to do that or be motivated to do that, or unfortunately, not have the skills themselves or the knowledge themselves, since they themselves didn't get taught personal finances. So, in an ideal world, we would do it in the education world.
Mm.
Knowing that it's not true, that's where the role of a business like mine was able to sort of step in and go to employers and say, your employees need financial education and guidance. And by the way, when they're more financially healthy and they're less financially stressed, they're going to like you as an employer because you gave them this benefit in the workplace. And they're going to be more financially healthy. So they'll be more productive during the workday and they'll stay longer. And that's what we found was the fact that we were impacting people's ability to focus on, their careers and their jobs and things in that 9 to 5 space that they cared about working on. Now, as it relates to, me as a mayor, I do think there are some exciting ways to invest in your population and make sure that your city is financially healthy on the individual level, so that people can, again, stay out of credit card debt so they have more money to go spend on their family, spend on going down to Navy Pier or saving up for and buying a house 1 or 2 years earlier than they would in the absence of financial education. And so the ripple effect of financial health in your society has infinite sort of ripples that come off of it, some of which are hard or impossible to measure. But conceptually, we know that when people are financially healthy, they live better lives, and they feel more fulfilled, and they feel more energized towards their own future and their own family's future.
Mm. All right. So now I'd like to move on to, I guess, more personal questions. So for example, we've heard your takes as someone who's politically invested in the future of Chicago. Now I want to ask you, from the perspective of, like, you know, a family man, essentially.
Mhm.
What are some challenges that you've, I guess, recently come to face as, a father?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. There's a couple of things that just sort of like pop out. I have a 5-year old and a 7 month old. So the obvious one is I don't sleep enough. That's a personal problem. So if you have any ideas for that, please let me know.
Yeah.
That being said, I think, our son goes to Chicago public schools, and we've loved that opportunity. We love that we can walk him to school. My wife and I are both former educators ourselves. She ran a school in the Austin neighborhood for about 10 years. We value education. But I think when I think about my family and other families across the city, we're facing similar challenges when we think about the sustainability in the city, which is number one, not all these Chicago public schools are delivering education in a way that meets the students and the families' need for education. Now, some schools are, and some schools are not. That's not a terribly controversial position. But as a city, we need to make sure that we are excelling when it comes to providing high quality education to all of our students. What does that look like? Well, number one, a crucial factor is attendance starts with achievement.
Mm.
Or, sorry, I got that back. Achievement starts
Starts
with
with attendance.
attendance, right? And right now we have a crisis of attendance. To put some numbers around that, over 30% of all Chicago public school students are chronically absent, meaning 90,000 children in this city do not go to school regularly. Now, if you parse that, kindergartners and first graders go to school much more than high schoolers, right? High
Right.
schoolers are older. Over 40% of high schoolers are chronically absent, right? And so you have a classroom of, let's call it 30 students, and 12 to 15 of them aren't going to be there in a given day. And so you look around the room and you got 30 chairs, and half of them are filled. We cannot have a school system where going to school is optional. And I would love to focus on and support Chicago public schools in making sure attendance is a critical priority and metric that we get right. Because no matter how great your teachers are, no matter how well resourced your school is, no matter how high quality the lunch is, and I've been into school, so it's not like anyone's going for the food, right?
Right.
But you cannot teach a child if they're not there, right? And so I think we have a massive obligation, a responsibility to focus on the things that matter. And I would say that, again, going back to it, achievement is going to start with attendance. Um, I love that opportunity for the city. I'm really sad that we're in this current state where school is optional. But I think we have to get that right. And I think we'll see a whole host of benefits when we do get that right. School, the safety in numbers, right? It's actually, you can look at all the data. When there are more people around, when there are more students around, schools, communities, streets are safer when people are in the building in school, when they're out and about in parks. There's safety in numbers, and when kids are, at home or doing whatever, and they're not accountable to going to school, I think we start to see the beginning of that equation where it's like, the school just feels a little less vibrant and a little less safe when kids aren't there, and so that's something I think about a lot. In addition to that, I mean, like, shoot, my wife and I both work. We have, for the duration of our relationship, and even as college educated individuals with respectable salaries, I mean, we found it hard at times to really make ends meet. And we were in the doing well, right? And we were sitting there and we were like, geez, we can barely save money. And we weren't like living, an exceedingly lavish lifestyle. I mean, I'm the type of person that would go to the grocery store and like try to hit a number. I was like, I got to get groceries and I got to walk out of here under $90 a week, right?
Right.
And it's like, man, if you're counting pennies and you're um, a dual income household with no kids, and you have a college degree, like that's a signal that other people are going to be struggling that much more to make ends meet. And I think we really have to take a broad look and a deep look at how we're creating affordability for families and for individuals in this city.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe. And I guess now to kind of wind things down, I just want to just wind it down to more casual topics, so to speak. So, for starters, growing up in Chicago, what's become like your go-to, like maybe not go-to place, because like that might be a little bit too niche, but maybe favorite cuisine, or like what's been your go-to like comfort meal these
Mhm.
past couple of weeks or days, just something at least.
Sure. Well, a couple of things. You're asking me to wind down now that I'm halfway through my cup of coffee. So
Okay.
I'm wound up, right? And I'm
Right.
talking about the city. So you got two things I love, the city and coffee. Um, just tiny little clarification. I apologize to all the lifelong Chicagoans, not technically uh, born and raised here. But, ever since I've been here, um, some of the things that I find, and maybe we'll step out of just the food topic because we could talk about food forever in Chicago.
Right.
Some of the things that I think are pretty special and pretty unique about Chicago. Number one, when I was running my business, it was out of 1871, which was Chicago's tech incubator. It was in the merchandise mart, and I used to take my folding chair to work, and this was during the summer, and when I would get done with a work day, call it, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, whatever it was, I would take my folding chair and I would walk to Millennium Park.
Mm,
And the fact that we have such an enormous public space that is well utilized during the summer months with free programming, concerts, movies, festivals, it's actually insane, right? I mean, even Central Park in New York, Central Park is on like 42nd Street, right? You got to go 40 blocks in order to get to Central Park if you're down on like Wall Street or the Battery or whatnot. And the fact that Millennium Park is just like chilling there in really the heart of downtown next to the lake, that is one of the most incredible investments and expressions of public space that I think you can find anywhere in the country. Um, I don't think that means it's necessarily accessible to everyone in the city,
right.
right? I mean, you still have people that have to travel 6, 7 miles to get to something like Millennium Park. But you also see a lot of other park infrastructure that I think Chicago's done really well with. And this is like, a legacy of like urban planning coming out of like the Burnham era, the World's Fair. We're at the University of Chicago, right by the Midway Plaisance, that,
Mm,
of course, was the site of that. But when you think about the design of Chicago, most people can still walk to a park. It might be like a really small park, it might have like a small playground for kids or maybe some outdoor grills. But you've got Garfield Park, which isn't necessarily in its heyday. It's not as safe as it needs to be, right? You have like, unfortunately, you have acts of violence in the middle of the day, etc. But you have the conservatory over there. You've got Humboldt Park, which is an incredibly beautiful and large park, much safer than it used to be 10, 15 years ago. You've got Lincoln Park with obviously the free zoo,
mm.
but then you have hundreds of other parks that people can access. And so I think our park system is one of the things that sort of connects you to the actual, we'll call it the earth because that's what it is,
Right.
but you're connected immediately to nature in a way that I think is really intentional and is a really important facet to sort of that day to day lived reality, even if it's not like summer concerts downtown. So the fact that you can like bump into a park walking around or taking CTA or driving, that's a always been a joy for me to know that there's a park nearby.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much again, Joe, for giving your perspectives and not, again, as someone, not just as a someone with politically, you know, vested future into this,
Hmm.
but as someone, who genuinely loves the city.
Yeah.
I'm glad we can share. I'm glad we got the time to talk and for you to share your beliefs and values. With that being said, we're gonna wrap up this episode and wish all of you a good rest of the day.
Thank you for having me.